morning, everybody. And I can see that the numbers are ticking up already for this particular podcast that we're doing tonight. I'm very excited about this one. I think it's going to get not controversial from our side as the panelists, but some of the topics and the responses to them, I think you're going to be surprised, delighted in some senses that you're not alone in your thinking, possibly even more concerned about the scenario than you thought you were before. But as people shuffle in to into tonight's event, and I'll give more time to those who are like me, always at the back of the class, running in late to things. I'm just going to introduce myself. I'm Carly Brookfield. I'm Chief Executive here at Driving Instructors Association. Tonight, I'm joined by Graham Hooper, another well-known face in our industry, who's recently joined DIA for his sins as our head of driver training development. And if he's got time tonight, he'll tell you a little bit more about what that role is going to entail. And I've also got what I've just described, if he doesn't mind me saying this, a gamekeeper, possibly turned poacher from DVSA, Chris Howes, joining me as well. So as we are dead on the 6:30 deadline here, I've done my introduction of me and Graham. I don't think I need much more introduction, but I'm going to flick to Graham first for a brief introduction of who he is for those people who don't know him, and then I'm going to flick to Chris, who might not be as familiar to some people on here tonight, but maybe a familiar face to a lot of you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. For those who don't know me, I've been an ADI 30 years, been training ADIs and PDIs for the last 25, and probably responsible for training some of the top trainers in the industry now. So lots of connections, and also some of you may know I've done joint ventures with Chris before. So I'm going to hand over to Chris now.
Evening, everybody, and welcome. Thanks for the invite. Yeah, this could be interesting. Looking forward to this. So my background, I was an ADI. I became a driving examiner in '96. Did various things after that, move on, tested in all categories. So cars, bikes, ADI, trucks, buses, everything. Became a staff instructor, which was some of the best working years of my life at Carding. It was such a wonderful place to work and help people and see people fly basically from there. Went into policy. I did 2 stints in policy, one with motorcycles for 2 years, and more recently ADI. I was with quality assurance, 2 stints, which basically involved me going to different parts of the country and watching other examiners work to make sure they did their job properly, which may be very popular indeed, as you can imagine. I retired last February. Oh my word. It's just flown by. I know I look too young to be retired and all that, but never mind.
Of course.
So here I am. I'm still trying to keep my hand in, doing a bit, because I've still got an itch that needs scratching with road safety.
Brilliant. Well, we are absolutely thrilled to have you here, Chris, tonight, because I do believe, if I'm not being too presumptuous, we're going to have a little bit of behind the curtain, the inner workings of the machine revealed to us tonight, and maybe even a little bit of pushback on some of these official lines that we're getting from DVSA at the moment on the whole debacle of test supply. But before we start, just a little bit of housekeeping, people. As per, if you're familiar with doing these sessions with us, it's a no hold barred chat. We want to hear from you as much as you know you want to hear from us. So if you have comments and you just want to discuss or raise points such as your opinion, please keep that to the chat for now, and we'll monitor that and we'll interject with that when we think it's appropriate. If you've got any specific questions, pop those into the Q&A so we can pick those up, and where appropriate, we'll interrupt the chat where we can if we think that they're urgent questions to be answered at that moment. Otherwise, we'll take them through to the end and we'll try and do a summary of those questions towards the end. If you've got any problems, as I've just popped in the chat there, with sound or vision, seeing anything or hearing anything on the screen, then let me know and I will try and resolve that for you, whilst the other guys who are much more expert in this matter of testing and training than I am will actually be doing most of the chatting, hopefully. The one thing we're going to do just to start, though, it's a kind of 2-part section we're doing today. We're kind of looking at this consultation that's just been launched on the 28th of May about the booking process and the booking system, which I'll cover off first in a moment. And then we're really going to go into the meat of the test supply issue and what's happening out there and what could be done to solve it, or is there anything that's really going to solve it at the moment? It's just a storm that we might just have to ride out. So we're going to very quickly share a presentation with you guys, and hopefully you should be able to see that. Can I get a thumbs up from people on your emojis if you can find them, that you can actually see my presentation? Normally that works. Yes, great, thank you. If you haven't used these sessions before, you have the ability to have limited displays of emojis. So there's no aubergine. I don't think there's any roll the eyes emojis, unfortunately, but there are thumbs up. So it helps us later on when we might be actually taking some straw polls of you to do these kind of things and to know that you can actually see my screen. So for those of you who weren't aware, because it only was launched last week or the end of the week before, there is a consultation on improving car driver test booking rules. I'm going to whiz through this. This information is on dvsa.gov.uk, and I'll include the link at the end of the presentation. So consultation launched on the 28th of May, ends on the 23rd of July 2025. It seems like that's an age away. It's not. Before you know it, you might have missed your opportunity to reply to this consultation. It's absolutely urgent that you actually do respond to this consultation, because it's open to the public, the pupil and the parents as well. We need as many ADIs responding to this consultation as well. Otherwise, we might get a skewed response to it from the public who want to vote in a certain way that might not be suitable for ADIs out there. DVSA's stated goal is to make booking a driving test easier for everyone whilst preventing excessive charges for learner drivers. What they say they've done so far is run a call for evidence, which was from the 18th of December 2024 to the 11th of February 2025, my birthday, when I turned 21 again this year, asking learners, instructors and booking services about their experiences with the current system. They analysed almost 27,000 responses. So if you wondered why we didn't have as much test supply to the front line, it was because quite a few people were sat there with a load of consultation responses to plough through rather than using AI and use them to develop the proposals in this consultation. There's a lot here, so I'm not necessarily going to go through it because, as I said, I'm keen to get to the meat of the conversations we're going to have tonight. But the high demand for tests at the moment has seen some real change in consumer behaviours and how people use DVSA online services. Customer insight data shows that consumers are booking tests in locations that they wouldn't normally want to, and they don't really intend to take their test in some circumstances, so they're going to resell it on. Commercial websites offering to search for and book tests on behalf of learner drivers have obviously had an explosion, and they're the ones making the real hay whilst the sun shines in this scenario. Automated tools being used to find available test slots, well, that's the bots and various other versions of those. Tests being resold with extra fees, often costing learners more than double. Actually, in some of our research, up to 400% increase in charges by some of these reselling platforms. Keir Starmer wanted to intervene at one point on the reselling of Oasis tickets at ridiculous prices, but not necessarily on a government agency's own services. And 327,000 driving tests were swapped in 2024. Not surprising, is it, given what's happening out there? And 29,000 tests were swapped over 10 times more. So there's also an issue with swapping. Nice to have the flexibility, but have we given too much flexibility? And this is the conclusion that has made it harder for DVSA to do its job and offer test slots more fairly. It's not all about consumer behaviour. This data might make you think it is, but we'll dive into that later on. So that's their rationale for doing this consultation. The key questions in the consultation that we want you to focus your mind on, not necessarily in this session, but in coming days as you respond to this consultation. Question 1 is all about who can book and manage driving tests. Option A on this question is only learner drivers can book and manage tests. Feel free to use your emojis at this point to tell me what you think as I'm on each screen about each of the options. And in this option, driving instructors would no longer be able to book or manage car driving tests for learners, and instructors could still use the online service to book driving tests and set dates and times when they're available and unavailable to take their pupils for driving tests. At the moment, I'm seeing the lots of shocked face emojis and some laughing emojis at the hystericism of that particular option. Question 1, option B, both learners and instructors can book, but only learners can make changes. So you could book in this system ADIs, but you couldn't actually make changes. It would be up to your pupils who, as you know, you can just absolutely trust these absolute experts in driver education to make decisions like this. That is exactly why they're coming to you as a professional, to tell you when they want to make amends and change their driving test slot to something earlier than they should have. Option C is to keep the current system. And I can imagine, without being arrogant about what the response is going to be from the industry, it's going to be to keep the current system, keep the status quo. And who could blame you in this respect? Question 2 is how tests are actually managed. So option A would be removing the ability to swap tests or change test locations. So in this option, learners could no longer swap tests with someone else. Learners could make 2 changes to their own test date. They could not change the location, but they could still cancel and rebook tests if they wanted a different location. So making it harder to do those cancel and move things. Question 2, sorry, carried on question 2. Option B is to limit test swaps and location changes. So in this option, you can make up to 2 changes as a pupil or swap their test in total. Tests could be moved to test centres within a certain geographical area of the original booking, so you'd be limited, but within a geographical area. And we could adjust these limits during busy periods if needed. So trying to build in more flexibility for DVSA in the system to move things as well as pupils. And the final option of the second question is keep current swapping rules and location change rules. So keep the status quo. So looking at the emojis there, chaps, I think the feeling is that option C on both the questions is where the crowd is going to tonight. What's your view, Graham and Chris, on those options, or is that a bugger's model of a menu that we've been given here?
I think looking at it in my head, we're damned if we do and damned if we don't, because I just don't see how, if we keep it as it is, then we carry on doing what we've always done. I'm not. I have no faith in the DVSA actually being able to reduce the backlog unless there's some form of extreme action. However, that extreme action is not going to be popular with everyone. So for argument's sake, let's ban all test swaps. If we banned all test swaps, then what's the point of being a bot because you can't resell? But that won't, for some businesses, that won't be viable. So yeah, I'm not sure that we're going to get, if we're going to do something, it's as that American president said, you can't please all the people all of the time. And learners are going to have a great input in this. And they might just want to oust us and go, we'll be in charge of our own tests. Sod the ADIs. So, as you said earlier, I urge ADIs to fill out this consultation and stop having the attitude of the DVSA won't listen to us. They might listen to somebody else.
And that could be the general public who are going to vote with their feet for being able to control the system themselves particularly because of their frustration. Chris, what do you think of all of this? You know, you've been in the machine. You know all the internal view on these kind of things.
I think the if we go back to the initial view when this was first highlighted, and people first started talking about it, the biggest problem was from the IT experts out there who would set aside selling tests using their technology, whatever that was, which I'm certainly not an expert in. DVSA would take some action to get them stopped. By the time they'd taken action to get that stopped and close them down, they would just close down, another 3 would pop up. And that was the problem I had at the time. Now, I don't know, but I've heard they're getting more of a grip of that. I don't know how they're doing that. But certainly not that long ago, I got an advert through which offered me everything from a driving license to a passport and every other piece of important paperwork you probably want as a citizen of this country. I took it to the registrar because I thought, well, it's not for us to deal with, but certainly DVLA might be interested in this. And it was a menu, and each part had a price. So driving license was about £1,000. All these, there must have been 15, 20 things on there. And he just laughed and he said, Chris, this has been going on for years. This happens all the time. This is just the first one you've gotten. We can't do anything about it because all they do, open up a site, sell these things. A few people will pay X amount of thousands of pounds for them. They close it down, run away with the money and open up somewhere else. And it almost seems like the people using this technology and the bots, for example, were taking that kind of approach. How you stop that? I think that was the most difficult thing they were facing at the time. Interesting enough, you talked about some of the prices, 400%, I believe you said there, Carly. On a more personal note, in my area, I went to my barber's a couple of weeks ago, and his wife came in. She was telling me that she'd just booked a test. She'd been told by her ADI to book it for anywhere she could get. She booked it for Northampton, which is about 40 miles away from here, and then managed to get a swap, and it cost her £15 to get the head list, and she'd been trying for months. So whether supply and demand, there's more and more people trying to sell these things now, so it's getting a bit cheaper. Well, I don't know, but for whatever reason, She managed to pay 15 quid and get a test pretty much immediately within a couple of weeks. Or
So
3
it's
weeks.
either being completely overvalued and it's a rip-off, or it's actually being undervalued. And one of the things that people say about the driving tests and the issues that we have in controlling demand is, if you increase the price, do you increase the value perception? And therefore, people won't make it as much of a throwaway item. But at £15, it's a throwaway item, isn't it?
Yeah. Just while on about the price, if you don't mind, something that's come up quite often. People repeatedly asking DVSA, why don't you put the price of the test up? It is not down to DVSA. I don't know if everybody's aware of that or not. The last time it came up a couple of years ago, they went back to the government and said, this is what we propose to pay for this and everything that comes behind it. And the government says, no, you can't do that. It will be unpopular. So this is what you can put it up by, which is why we had that ridiculously small increase in the fee. It was hardly worthwhile. So it seemed to people on the outside looking in. But DVSA don't have a say. They can make the suggestion to the government of what the price of a test should be, but they can't set it themselves.
Yeah, and there's a complex structure behind any pricing decision as well, isn't there? From having worked with the Treasury previously, and also what DVSA will explain to us in meetings when we raise it, which is they have to do an economic impact assessment for any kind of monkeying around with pricing on, the individual, the agency. There's only a certain level of profit that can be made to keep the service sustainable, all those kind of things. So it's not an overnight decision to be made. But obviously people will just put forward the business case of that value perception with that, and the theory test are too cheap, it's too throwaway. Um, but yeah, I get that completely. There's a question that I get asked, and I must admit, not being an ADI, being a marketeer, and being a bit stupid, I kind of want to ask this question myself, so I'm prepared to look stupid over it. On question one, it makes me want to ask for a question, an option D. ADIs only can make the bookings. The only people allowed into the system to book tests for pupils in the United Kingdom are the licensed professional that have been through the DVSA's own training program, and we're supposed to be advocating as the gateway to your license. Only those individuals should be allowed to go into that booking system and book tests.
I think and this is again, it's not something I know, but given on past experiences, those of you who've been about a while might remember a consultation we did on the use of dual controls, and there was a question that's been asked a couple of times actually. So it was around, do we need to have dual controls in every car and every test? And otherwise, or other words, it would be pretty much all ADIs. And there was a point of view put forward that you would discriminate against certain people who couldn't afford or didn't need to go to an ADI because of a contact in the family, or they just couldn't afford to do it. How much value there was in that at the time, I really don't know. But the result of the test was there was very little difference in crash statistics from no duals to actually having duals.
Yeah, Graham, what do you think about that?
Well, I would
Radical
actually
idea.
say, I think the biggest problem comes from, one, the government aren't interested in us. What they don't want is that continued bad press of learner drivers whinging about not being able to get a driving test. There's a headline: Transport Secretary acts to make thousands of extra driving tests available each month. Okay, so thousands, but the backlog is hundreds of thousands. So thousands don't make a difference, but that's a nice soundbite for the press, who will leave them alone. New measures unveiled to crack down on test buying bots and deliver at least 10,000 extra tests a month. Does anyone know how many tests these bots are actually buying up? I think this is, training capacity to double to drive up availability of driving examiners. I'm going to set Chris off there in a second, because how long does it take, to get a driving examiner? Yeah. Government action to help ready learners pass, unlock opportunities and drive economic growth, delivering on our plan for change. So it's all the same sort of garbage, and here we are in the middle of a consultation. Yeah.
Yeah, and just returning to that whole thing about ADIs, I did actually have a conversation yesterday. I can't go into the details of the workshop that I was in yesterday because it's, it's part of our privilege to go and have those closed shop conversations at times to work through a few ideas. But one of the things I did say is, well, I am the 5-year-old child. I am very much like, why? Okay, well, that's not a good enough reason, is it? And I said, well, one of the arguments given was, well, it won't really be that popular with the public because they see it as a public access system, being able to book a test. I get what Chris is saying about accessibility, but I think there are ways that we could work around that. And I always think about we worry about the cost burden to the few, but we're not as worried as we should be about the cost burden to all of us, which is, I think, £13.4 billion to GDP each year of road accidents. Now, I'm not saying novice drivers cause all of that, but they contribute to that fact. And the one thing I'm saying is, we need to worry less about it being a popular thing and the public liking a process, and we need to worry more about public health. We need to worry about what's good for the public versus what they think they would like to do. And we've done that in the past legislatively when we had smoking bans and other things that were done for public health issues. So I think we need to start having conversations with the government about, don't worry about what the electorate thinks, think about preserving the electorate's lives by having systems that work better in terms of road safety. But I'm just going to go through to a few comments that people have
Can I
made.
just go to Chris?
Whilst I'm looking at the
Right.
comments.
Chris,
Mhm.
you're very experienced in training at ADI examiners and examiners to take driving tests. If I recruited 500 today, or I would say 450 because that's the route, 450 today, out of that
Yeah.
450 in your eyes, how many would make it through? Do we squeeze out the bottom of that 450? And what would be the retention rate of that 450 over the first 12 months, in your opinion?
That is a massive question, Graham.
I know, I like these things.
Yeah, and this is where the start Dunning-Kruger effect comes in. People interfering in things they should not be. Ultra-crepidarianism, there's a word for you. I like that word. People interfering with things where they put themselves forward as experts and they know nothing about it at all. If I go back a few years, probably 8 to 10 years, I was the supervising staff instructor at Cardington and responsible for the day-to-day running of all the training there. We'd worked out where we had a really good team of staff instructors who knew their stuff, who were very, very good. The recruitment was in a good place, and we had a pass rate of around, it was in the low 90s, about 92%. And of that 8% that didn't pass, there was a few percent that were people who just give up on the course because it wasn't what they thought it was going to be. So the failure rate was very small. DVSA brought 2 consultants in, business consultants, who looked at the recruitment process. Their words to me were, if you can give us all the characteristics of what would make the ideal examiner, we can give you tests for that to improve your recruitment campaign, because the aim was to get 100% pass rate of really top people they're bringing through. At the same time, from operations management, we were getting comments like, we've got the best new entrants we've ever had. Around that time, there was a similar kind of real sharp rise in demand for tests, which led to Project 350, not 450, 350. So this was the forerunner. It felt like overnight it went from, let's produce this continue along this quality track, doing what we're doing, where we're getting so much right, and everybody was on board with it, to panic, we need to get bums on seats. And we went from producing a plan for the best possible examiners we would get to minimum viable product for examiners. What's the least we can do for these people and get them through so we can get them conducting tests as soon as possible? You know, the thorn in the side in all this was always L&D, learning and development, and the trainers that I was heavily involved with for a lot of years. Because like any business, I suppose, in car, you would all know this better than me. If you've got 2 sides, if you've got throughput and finances against quality, there's a clash done somewhere, and a clash in the middle. So you need a balanced approach to this from both sides. There's somewhere in the middle it's got to meet. And this is where it started to go out of control. Within my old boss did a presentation at Nottingham at headquarters that showed that when people who didn't know what they were doing interfered with the training course, or tried to, the pass rate dropped course upon course, year upon year. And over a couple of years, pass rate went from the low 90s I'm talking about down to 30%. 30%. And the question I asked was, we are selling people a dream of a dream job with pay and holidays and pensions and all the rest of it. And at that time, a lot of people, it was a job for life. A lot of people came in because it was a good job and they wanted to stay there for life. Then suddenly we're making these offers, and because we weren't bringing the right people in, they were panicking to get bums on seats. People were failing. They were failing the course because they weren't the right people to be on the training course. They would never make it. They were going to cause more damage to themselves and other people than anything. We couldn't have that happening. That caused a lot of trouble. And one of the big things they wanted to get rid of was they didn't see any reason why within the training course was 5 weeks. One of the things that introduced in that time was a middle week where they went back to the test centre and just had time to absorb the training they'd received at that point. Just to slow down, just put the brakes on, let's stop everything. Let's look at a different subject matter and give you time to absorb and think about. Well, that went very quickly to cut the course down to 4 weeks. The next thing they were after was to remove all driver training from the driving examiner's course. Now, that got quite heated, shall we say, that discussion. From the top, from the chief driving examiner down, they were told time and time again it wasn't going to happen. And it didn't, but we fought tooth and nail to keep it. So, for my opinion, whether it's ADI, whether it's examining, you need 2 skill sets. You need to be an expert in the subject that you are teaching or examining, and you need to be an expert in the teaching, instructional, whatever skills, or the examining skills. Take one of those away and you've lost.
Mm.
So how could you have examiners examining something they knew very little about, i.e. driving? So the assessment drives to come into the agency were done by staff instructors, and there was too many to be done. So other people got involved in that, and it got worse and worse. Now then, there are still good people that still genuinely believe that the vast majority of people in DVSA who are driving examiners are dead keen to do the job right. They want to do the job right. But if they aren't given the tools to do it, they can't. But there are people that's been there a long time who are absolutely top people, absolutely top people. In the last couple of years, I don't know exactly how long, but about 2 years, a trial started 2 years ago to not do driver development training with driving examiners in their training. So they got a one-off assessment done by somebody who is not trained in holistic assessment. All they know is L tests. They're not trained in holistic assessment. They've got no knowledge about how the hows and whys of training somebody in driving to take them from where they are to where they need to be in 1 week of driver tuition. So for the last 2 years, every brand new exam that's come through has had no driver development. And then they've gone to become. Now, in your figures, Carl, you sent me early on, I can't remember what the figures were. It showed the pass and fail rate for new entrants. It was quite low. Why? And again, L&D, and where it is there, the other
So
one.
we've got this weird dichotomy then, haven't we? Which is really worrying, not just weird. That the quality assessor role, which is the examiner, is not quality. And I'm not attacking anybody who's doing this job. I'm saying the process is not designed to bring out a good quality assessor, i.e. an examiner, because of the way it's been done at the moment.
And Graham's favourite question, why? It's because of pressure from governments and ministers. We're under pressure from the public because they can't get driving tests. Our job's under threat, so we want bums on seats. How do you get more bums on seats? Well, so you're telling me I have to lower the standard? No, we're not saying that, but we need more people through. So how are you going to do it? So all these things that we've talked about and you're going to talk about have come into this. And if you think about it, everything to do with quality within DVSA has been got rid of. Cardington being the biggest one, which is just the biggest industrial crime of ever, in my opinion, to what we've got now. You've got good people who want to do a job well, and they've taken the biggest tool of the lot away. And the people coming in who want to do the job well, want to do the job right, everything's just getting diluted because everything's being pushed down. We're getting more and more influence from admin people who think they know what they're talking about with the driving test, they don't. At one time, in my time, first starting out, to be technically competent, in this skill set and this side of it was a good thing to have. It's now frowned upon. People have been pushed to the side because of it.
And if you're sitting there as somebody who is technically competent and has gone through that better regime, and you're seeing a recruitment strategy, which, if I'm being extremely blunt and cynical, you could describe as 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head,
Pretty much.
cannon fodder, it's not motivational to you as somebody who prides themselves on quality outputs and the training that you were given to get there, if you're seeing this influx of people who don't really know much, aren't going to be given much knowledge, and don't really care, because obviously one of the big things that they're having from recruiting that type of individual is there's a massive dropout in even the training period for new recruits, isn't there, at the moment? There's massive attrition in the training
Exactly.
period.
I think just looking at the chat at the moment, it reminds me a bit of Dad's Army. We're all doomed. Yeah. That's
I'm going to bring in somebody now. This never works normally for some reason, and I've blamed the participants for not actually speaking up when I've given them the chance before. But it could be the system. And I know a gentleman called Rob has actually had his hand up for quite a while now. So Rob, I'm going to press the button on my Zoom screen, and I'm vouching for this myself that I'm doing it. And I'm going to try and allow you to talk. But if it doesn't work, there's clearly something wrong with our system. So if I allow you to talk right now, Rob, you're actually muted. If you take your mute off, do you want to ask us a question? We should be able to hear you. You're not on mute on mine. Yeah, you should be okay on mine. Let's go to Rob. I'll come back to you in a second. I can't hear you for some reason. Let's try Thomas and see if he will work. Thomas, can you unmute yourself so we can try and hear you? It could be something to do with our system, so I'll have to get that fixed afterwards. If you could unmute yourself so you can say something. For some reason, that's not working.
I think, Carly, it's set that all as a webinar.
It shouldn't be. They reset it that it shouldn't, but we will. Right. Okay. If you can, guys, can you put your actual question or comment in the chat?
I'll tell you what I can do.
Dreadfully sorry about that, but we'll try and resolve that for the next session. It might take a bit of time to resolve right now.
Okay, just bear with me, Carly. I'm going to go through. If I can't, apologise if I don't do everyone, but I'll start at the beginning. DVSA should let ADIs sign off on manoeuvres and emergency stops, cut the test to 20 minutes independent driving, allowing DEs to do 10 to 12 tests a day. Well, I think we've already got rid of most of the manoeuvres, didn't we? The turning the lobe, the reverse around the corner. Emergency stop, plan to go 1 in 7. So there is something towards that. Yeah, I don't think they're going to need to be signed off. They just won't be tested. It's as simple as that. I don't know how you feel about that, Billy. They just won't be tested. And I know from my experience, if they're not tested, then they just get dropped. Because I don't see anybody out there doing the turn in the road or the reverse around the corner anymore in the old favourite locations.
That's the emergency stop was moved down to 1 in 3, Graham, because the discussion at the time was.
Yeah, but it's going to be moved to 1 in 7, I believe,
yeah.
with a new one.
Well, there's an argument now with all the stuff that's on cars with the ADAS and.
Someone has put, Howard, due to the backlog, how are you feeling on allowing learners to take a test in their hometown or nearest? I just had concerns. I answered that one. I just had concerns. If you're a university town, how the hell does that work? Because I remember when my daughter was in university in Leeds, and we've got a university town near me, Canterbury, or city, sorry, Canterbury. So I'm not sure about that limiting the distance. And we're not all going to agree. Only learner drivers to book and manage tests, no ADIs, no third people, no swaps. If you can't do the test, cancel and rebook, period. That's possibly, I quite like that actually, because maybe just do something for 6 months and then review. Maybe a short-term answer, which is quite harsh, and then we can go back to the old ways if the backlog goes. I've got an option A all the way. I can't remember what option A is now. It's simply a lack of examiners to do the job, and they can't recruit enough people to do the job. I think you've got to have enough examiners to train them to do the job, which is part of the problem. please interfere, contradict me because I'm only giving my immediate
Well, that
view.
goes back to, as people know, I'm a private business owner, and this is the marked difference, obviously, in the frustration we have in the private sector with the public sector. That in the private sector, we don't like to spend our money necessarily, but we will do in crisis to get ourselves out of the crisis. And one of the things that and you will innovate to get out of the crisis as well. And one of the things that we haven't seen here, when we raised at the Transport Select Committee in December, and PCS and us were very aligned on this, is the pay and the conditions have to get better,
Yeah,
because otherwise you're spending more money on that churn of losing good people and not being able to attract good people. And if we might be paying too much to people who aren't doing a job that we necessarily need at the moment, and they're sat there on good salaries with good conditions because they're not necessarily doing anything that's worthwhile, and they're not as under pressure as examiners are.
yeah.
But we're not paying those frontline troops. We're not giving the troops in the trenches the stuff that they need, the equipment they need, the training they need, the motivation that they need to stay there and do that job, and to also be joined by colleagues that they've got confidence that they want to go shoulder to shoulder into battle with. That's one of the,
Okay,
is
you
that one
must
of the
have been
problems, Chris?
reading
Yeah.
Andrew Niner's mind, because that's basically what he said.
Oh, okay. Well, me and Andrew will obviously
Change their
on like
working
a house on
conditions.
fire. Yeah.
I voted no change, but he absolutely needs to change. Okay, I like that one because it sounds like me. I can't make my mind up at the moment. How is limiting the number of swaps going to reduce the demand for tests? All it will do is increase the number of people taking their test, because the bots can't make any money if they can't swap tests, and
Yeah.
it takes the bots out. That's my point there. And I think
Yeah.
that's Trevor. I understand what you're saying, Trevor, but I think we can take the bots out then, if only if you just don't allow bot swaps. How can you make money by reselling? So that's just.
I'm going to pick up as well. I was going to comment something here about attracting quality people. Now, DVSA have maintained throughout this process that they would see that ADIs and former ADIs, unfortunately, because under the regs you would have to give up your ADI badge to be an examiner, and we kind of hope with what we call the sunsetting of EU laws that could have happened as part of Brexit. There's the sunsetting of Article 20, is it, where an ADI isn't allowed to examine? You would see that happening, but some ADIs reporting into us that we're the natural hunting ground for examiner recruitment, but we're not getting through the civil service machine, the testing that happens, to be able to get into those positions. And one of the questions I meant to ask yesterday, and please excuse me for forgetting because I hold a whole agenda of questions, was, is there anything we can do to, you say you want ADIs to come over to the bright side, not the dark side, but they are finding it tough to get through the hurdles. And is there anything we can do if those are genuinely the type of people that you want?
Civil service jobs, set up an alert on there for anything that comes up, and that's about it. It's not very well done because, again, it's not in my area of knowledge. However, given past experiences, I've often been told that they're not willing to give a budget for advertising their jobs. They want people to go to them rather than pull people towards them through adverts and stuff. Certainly, when I became an examiner, I saw the advert in a national newspaper. But all that kind of thing stopped many, many years ago. Now it's about test centres and civil service jobs online, those kind of things. It's an interesting point about driving instructors versus other people from other backgrounds, shall we say, become driving examiners, because they did go through a spell a few years ago where they said it would be preferable. They got, in their words, DVSA's words, they got fed up with fishing out the same pond. That was the phrase used. So they wanted to try and look elsewhere. So they actively encouraged people from other backgrounds to come in. The official line was that, and I can see part of it why, because one thing that people don't understand is that being a driving instructor and being a driving examiner are completely separate, different jobs. There is very little similarity between the two.
Yeah.
Because you can do one doesn't mean you can do the other.
Yeah.
There is
And we know that at Diamond as well.
yeah. There's a shared base of information and knowledge. But where the ADIs came into it, and then it came down to more about the personality rather than the qualification. They understand driving. They teach driving, or should do. They used to sit next to learner drivers. They've got some experience of that. And that depth of knowledge of driving and that bit of experience made them stand out, especially in the early stages, which then led into understanding assessment, which is an absolute skill in itself. And that is why it is a 4 or 5 week long course. It's about understanding how to assess and why to assess into the right levels and all of that. So generally speaking, taking out the personality side of it, for me, being an ADI was always an advantage to a degree, as long as those bad habits weren't so deeply ingrained that they couldn't break them from their ADI side to become an examiner side.
The other thing as well is if you want to attract ADIs at the moment, not only is it seemingly hard for them to get through that process, but you're not going to attract an ADI at the moment because the salary isn't sufficient.
Really?
Yeah, back to pay them. And it's a very short-termist thing to not increase the salary because they're going through so much churn, and the expense of churn in a business in terms of recruitment is incredible. So, I used to work in recruiting for government services as well as for private sector. And you'd rather retain good people, and you'd rather not be going out and recruiting because of the distraction, if nothing else, from services and not having the right people in post. But the latest line we've got from them on recruitment is that the latest driving examiner recruitment campaign has recently closed, and we are currently processing the applications. If that was being the communications cynic who prepares these kind of FAQs for large organisations, but is also asking the questions now in this seat, if you had a good story about examiner recruitment, you wouldn't have had such a bland bullet point as that being given out, would you? You would have had a good news story in there. That's just we've done a process, we've had some applications, not we've got loads in, they're great quality, we're really excited, we're going to get them out to you soon doing tests.
Reading through those FAQs and stuff, you think the word quality is not mentioned once. There's no mention of quality at all.
That's disappointing thing.
As grim as a without quality, but nothing.
Sorry.
Well, you can do. Let's have other people's comments and views because they're as informed, as important as ours are, because you're at the coalface of all of this. Chris has been at the coalface of testing. The ADIs at the coalface of the pupils and trying to get the tests and get them through.
So I'll go through a few, and then we can pick out the ones we can answer. DVSA need to have a verification process where they contact the learner, say a test is booked against your license number. Please confirm it was you, like the banks do when you set up a new payee. You could have that app, couldn't you? Where whenever you do a payment, you have to go to your app and make the app, say this is me.
Confirmation.
So, yeah, that's a possibility. Why can't we use the same system for motorbike and vocational tests, where we can book test slots and allocate appropriate candidate at the last moment? Was told by examiner 450, went on to training, said only 2 passed out of the 450. That might only be 2 currently come out. I don't believe 2 out of 450. I think the information might be slightly wrong, but you can correct me if you've got the evidence. Salary of a driving examiner is too low. Yeah, we've done that. None have stayed, someone's saying. Well, I don't mind these comments, but I would like some evidence to when you say
if you're talking about none of staying, that is to do with the retention through the training process. So DVSA have said to us that they are losing a lot of people in the training, but they lose up to 10 to 12 examiners a month in general across the year. And so they'll have that natural attrition anyway of people who are already in post, but they've seen quite major attrition of people falling out. So these are people that are actually an expense to the agency because they've come in and they're training them, so the money's been spent on them. And these are people who are going before they can deploy. They're people who might be applying for this and a job as a Tesco delivery driver and something else. And they're throwing a lot of applications out there. They might even get to the training process and go, well, I'll have a go at it because I haven't got anything else that's picked up at the moment. And then
what's wrong with avocado delivery drivers then?
I like Fred and Florence clothing at Tesco. Go sue me.
All right.
The other thing that adds into that, Carly, is on that subject, is that the problem is, and it has been for a long time, we hit these spikes where we need lots of tests being done. So we train examiners. Once the spike settles, and maybe go into recession of requirement, what do we do with examiners? how is that cost covered? So in the last lot of 450, and I don't know what the current state is, most of those people that were being brought on were being brought in on a 2-year contract. So would you like to be a driving examiner, a job for life? It's going to take you all this time to get through that, and that. And then, by the way, in 2 years, you could be out of a job and doing something completely different because there's not a lot of transferable skills out of that.
Don't they realise they're going to lose people anyway, Chris?
Sorry?
Don't they lose? They're going to lose people anyway. So, by the time they get the 2 years up, they'll be recruiting more.
Well, that's the strange thing, Graham, because it was always a job for life. It was, once you're in there, people actually enjoyed it. They were keen about it. They were engaged in it. And they wanted to do it and wanted to do it right. For some reason, in the current recruitment campaign over the last couple of years, people are coming in, getting the qualification, and decide, no, I don't like this. I don't like to do it.
I've got one here which is making me scratch my head. There are two ways and two ways only. Then we can both raise the standards of driving and give value to the process. Increase the test speed. I like that. And reduce the number of faults permitted on the practical test to 10. Won't that just increase the failure rate and just put more people back in to the system?
Actually, on the note, Graham, the current amount of driving faults was only supposed to be in for about a year. Now it was supposed to be reduced down to 12, I believe, if I remember rightly.
Yeah.
Never happened because of that very fear. But things like driving fault figures is purely almost coincidental because it depends on the weight you attach to the fault that you're assessing.
Yeah.
So you could make it 6 faults, but the faults are going to be heavy. They're not quite a serious fault, but each of those faults has got to be heavier. And those 6, or if you make them lighter, then you could have 20. It's about the weight you attach to the fault that you assess rather than the amount.
We were talking about this the other day, Chris, so that makes sense to me.
Just going back to the exam recruitment thing, somebody's mentioned here that Lillian Greenwood wrote to everybody on the 23rd day and said that 154 examiners have completed training and now testing. Yes, that does sound good, doesn't it? Oh, 154 has been done. There's been a lot of people recruited, way more than that have fallen out of the training. So if you think of the cost to a public sector organisation of dealing with all of those, and I had a go at them the other day about this, about PDI applications. If you had a better aptitude test in Gateway and you had a better way of processing it, that agency would not be having to touch as many applications and deal with them, which is a massive distraction at this time when they could deploy those resources somewhere else. So that sounds like a good news story from an MP, but to the cynics that are sat here, we know the numbers that you've had to go through to get to 154, and that's not a good news story.
This is something that Bev's making a point that I'm when I'm talking to, it's only anecdotally other driving instructors, but I think the Ready to Pass campaign was the start of all this. Learners actually encouraged to look at themselves and their ability to drive. Suddenly they're all experts. Once they've had 20 hours, they book a test and they end up without a willing instructor to take them. All makes no sense whatsoever. There's also a trend that I'm being told is happening is people are having about 20 hours training, booking a test which is so far away that they stop all their training.
Yeah.
And then there's a huge gap. And then a month before their test, they're running around looking for a driving instructor. And then a week, 2 weeks before the test, they're panicking because they still don't want to lose the test. And of course, that will drive the failure rate down. And of course, then, if you want to learn a new skill, the obvious thing is you've got to practice. So then we now have the emergence of the school of mum and dad in the middle. Well, let's give the kids 20 hours to get them moving. Then they're probably just about okay for me to take them out. So now the school of mum and dad are teaching and then dumping them back on a driving instructor for the last month. Now, that's only anecdotal, but I am getting a lot of feedback from driving instructors about there's a gap happening in the middle now. People have stopped learning in the middle because of the length of waiting time.
There's a gap, and we've had a very, very diligent ADI up in the northeast, and I hope I'm not insulted by saying the northeast, but that was her accent. Who has Vicky, who has been sending me lots of reports, and she's been doing lots of FOIs to DVSA. She's been keeping their team very busy, and she actually asked for these numbers to be crunched for her, but she was told, go off and crunch these yourself. I'll give you the data. So she has crunched them, and I've sent that on to DVSA, and I've spoken about it in meetings with them, and that you can see that rise in PRNs during this crisis that Loveday said in the meeting the other day she didn't think it was a crisis. And that rise in PRNs and failure rate on PRNs, is clearly worrying. It's not massive, but as time goes on, these symptoms within the whole problem will become worse, and they could be the thing that kill you. Do you know what I mean? It's like you start being diagnosed with cancer, but the symptoms are the things that make you feel really bad every day, not necessarily the growth of the main tumor. And I think, these are the things to keep an eye on, these statistics and we wrote about that in our letter that we sent to Loveday back in May, was, this is the main problem, but this is all the offshoot problems that it's actually causing. So it's just like a ball, like a fat ball in a sewer that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's going to clog up all major systems eventually. And I know that's a very fatalistic view, but we've come to this having been 5 years into this Groundhog Day scenario. And Chris, you mentioned before, it's like Einstein's definition of madness. What do you think, Chris, of that? Because I've been very vocal that the 7-point plan was too little, too late. 25% of that plan was not actionable plans; it was actually plans to consult on plans, and that we're now 6 months into it, and we've seen no really direct results of it. I mean, what are your views on that 7-point plan?
I think there's two sides. If I take it from the DVSA side and the ADI side, we've spoke about this earlier on. From the DVSA side, and I'm not a mathematician by any stretch of the imagination. I prefer language to numbers any day of the week. However, that original plan, they brought in about, I think it was around 230 people who were warrant card holders, but weren't conducting tests because they were doing jobs, usually management type jobs, that involved that technical knowledge, but they weren't actually conducting tests. A lot of those, 180 odd of them, were LDTMs who don't normally test. So they brought these 200 in, and their quoted figure, which is in the figures again, it's been mentioned again, was approximately somewhere around 150,000 extra tests. And that was for 6 months. So you bring those people in for 6 months, and the pass rate dropped. So let's say it dropped to just under 50%, around 48%, somewhere around that seems about reasonable. Now that leaves you with 80,000 or so resits. But the examiners who've done the first test have now gone. You've lost those 230 examiners. Those 80,000 that have failed are now on the back end of the waiting list again with the same original amount of examiners. You haven't got those extra examiners to do the tests. So in my head, my very simplistic head, I couldn't work out, unless you're going to get 100% pass rate, then it wasn't going to work. So you need some kind of system. And this is, again, I told this tale earlier on, so I'll go through it quickly for people in the audience. I went to see one of DVSA's biggest customers about their training and results on ADI Part 2 and 3. And there's massive problems in that approach to some people. I'll come to that later on as well, because it's atrocious. And they had a group of ADIs that were being trained on a one-day training course thing, and said, "Would you come in and speak to them?" And I said, "Yeah, no problem." I went and introduced myself, and the first question it wasn't actually a question, it was a statement. And they pointed at me and said, "You aren't doing your job properly." And I said, "Okay, I wasn't aware we'd met. Never mind, you've seen me work. So what do you mean by that?" "You're not supplying enough tests." Okay, so I told them what DVSA were doing as far as recruitment, the previous 450, not the 450 they're on now, the 350 before that, how then that affected how many ADI examiners could then be trained, how long that took, around all that. So recruitment, and it was never going to solve everything through recruitment. It was impossible to produce those numbers because some of the things I said early on. Once you've got those numbers to bring that down, what do you then do with all those examiners? So I said, "Do you know what the pass rate is? Average pass rate for ADI Part 3. So I'm not talking about first, second, and third attempt. I'm talking about all the attempts." And it went quiet, and somebody said about 32%, I think. I said, "Yep, okay. Do you know what your company's pass rate is overall for Part 3? And it went really quiet. And I said, "Well, I only know because your training managers just told me it's 26%. So you're telling me that I'm not supplying enough tests. I'm telling you that you're wasting 74% of the tests that are supplied with failures. Where in any aspect of education is a 26% pass rate acceptable? Never mind 32% as well, even if we take everybody in. 32% pass rate in education.
Yeah.
That's not acceptable
I
anywhere."
think that's the problem with the learner driving test. Good ADIs don't want their learners to go for a test before they're ready. So, but then learners, been waiting 6 months plus to get a test. When they get the opportunity, they want to take the test. ADIs may go, "You're not taking a test in my car," and then they go in somebody else's car, and bloody hell, they pass. Which is like, it makes the ADI feel bad because they're trying to uphold that road safety principle. So I think that's a real problem, that people are going to have a go, and because people are going to have a go, if you think about it, they're not trained well, then that's going to the failure rate again is going to drop, and that is what's happening. It's dropping because they're not trained well and they're willing to have a go. We also, someone made the point about the number of international license holders coming in and having to be trained.
Yeah.
And we won't go down the political route of Brexit of
Well, they're not being trained, are they? They're just they're just going to test.
yeah, they're not having it. Yeah, they're just going to test. I mean, but saying that, that's always been happening. That's always been the case. I remember being at Wood Green Test Centre when they used to drive up on their own in their own cars, park the car anywhere they like, got out the car, stick 2 L plates on, go and do the test, come back, fail, take the L plates off, chuck them in the boot, and drive off because they
Still
got
happens.
a permit to drive.
Yeah, but that's because I don't fall out with, but I'm an unpopular person with the graduated license campaign community because they want me to get on board and advocate for it. But and I do have a relationship with them, and I've been speaking recently about how if you get on board with what I want to do first, I'll get on board with graduated license because it's a whole part and parcel of what we're pitching here. But they don't seem to realise that the problems we have in pre-test, and that if we resolve the problems in pre-test and made that a better world, we almost could argue there would be no need for graduated licensing. Because graduated licensing, if I'm being a cynic, is dual horses bolted. And so a lot of road safety practitioners, you wouldn't believe how ignorant they actually are of what happens. It's almost like they're heroes without capes. Thank God we're here to talk about post-test solutions. But when you quiz them on what do you actually think happens in pre, that it doesn't need a fix and that it's all got to be post-test fix, you see...
Too late, the horse has bolted. We know.
The intelligent ones get it and they come onto our side a bit more. And if you... What I was talking to DVSA about the other day when we were workshopping things was... if you control access to tests better by making competency assessments something that you do on the route to the test centre, and you have to accumulate competency before you can even go and book your final test, i.e. using ADI-led assessments, using more theory assessments, maybe even using some other levels of assessment, not only do you control flow at the speed it is to the test centre, you're also making sure that all pupils in the UK are consistently exposed to learning in the key areas of risk that they need to be before they acquire that license. And we're not talking about teaching them everything. We've got to be realistic. We've just got to teach them enough to know what a risk is and how to handle it, and to recognise how to handle it, even if they haven't necessarily done it in practice. But we don't even do that at the moment. And if we can do that, if we can have that modular competency-based system as the type that we describe in the Milestones project, which we will be launching soon, but the time to launch something like Milestones and recruit people to do more than just think about their test has not been right over the last 4 years. So that's why I've hesitated at pushing it out. If we could look at that being instituted, the benefits on the business case I made to do that research project in the first place were pupils are consistently across the country exposed to the same set of modules and learning and assessment, and AGIs will also have to deliver that. And some good ones do, some bad ones will do the bare minimum, and they won't do anything like the risk, kind of awareness stuff. They'll just do manoeuvres on an urban housing estate. And then there'll also be these levels of assessment that assess what the pupil's competency is in more theory testing and HPT testing. And it also, by the back door, will also assess the ADI's competence. If the pupil isn't performing in those theory tests, it doesn't matter if the ADI signs them off in every practical competence test, it's going to show up in the theory results that the ADI might need an intervention as well as a pupil. But you will also know where every single pupil in the UK is in their stage of learning in a modular system. We don't at the moment. It's a bug, as a private business owner who's been in charge of deployment in other organisations with completely different products. This is a terrible one for people to come in and try and fix as a problem because there's no resource supply management going on. You don't have the oversight. I think, Chris, it's really done by things like birth rate, age rates, general census of the population at the age of 17,
Can I
isn't it?
add something into the mix
Go
there?
on then. You're doing the stirrer,
Yeah, I know,
like we all need to know Graham Hooper's a
yeah.
stirrer. We know
But
you're a
also
stirrer.
with what you're saying about, we know we need this. However, we're having a growing band, and apologies to PDIs, a growing band of non-qualified driving instructors teaching. Yeah. So then that growing band of non-qualified driving instructors, through no fault of their own, can't get through the system and are going, let's say, the best part of a year or more on a pink license, failing and starting again. Of course, they can get through part one and part two very easily, and there is none policing of the ADI 120, ADI 21 AT, which means that any Tom, Dick, and Harry could sign it up. Often they wouldn't even know who's done it, and you can just fill it out. There's no policing of that. And then, so we've got this army of mum and dad, we've got the army of PDIs, and us ADIs who put a lot of effort into getting the green badge.
I'm not smiling because I find this.
No,
I'm smiling because
in
it's
some
madness.
respects, feel blamed for the shit show that is going on at the DVSA, and I know ADIs are feeling that way because that's the feedback is often given, and it's a shame that we can't change the way that we teach people to become ADIs so that they are fully invested in the system and not hidden.
But it's also, Graham, it's a stage before that as well. And this is another comment that I made to
Yes,
DVSA yesterday. They're saying that they basically, they're having to process a huge number of applications to be a PDI at the moment. Now, that worries me in the sense, again, of an agency that doesn't have the resources to deal with its core services like supply of testing, is having to deal with a massive administrative burden of all these PDI. Now, I did ask the question of the registrar, is there a statutory thing that stops you, that can mean that you turn the tap off? Are you allowed to turn the tap off on PDI applications? It's a tricky one because there's a tribunal, we're allowed to talk about it, it's a tribunal is in a public domain a few years ago where this was challenged, and DVSA are stymied by that result in that tribunal that says you can't really deny somebody the right to train as a PDI if they make the criteria. But so that was we can't really turn the tap off because of that. I said, but hang on a minute, if they meet the criteria, if you had more aptitude testing and more hurdles to judge whether they met the criteria, a better gateway process, then you've got more evidence that more people don't meet the criteria, so they shouldn't be allowed into the system. And that's fair because they would be given a fair opportunity to do some level of assessment before. Now, we know in other areas and other professions, there are more hurdles to become that professional. Therefore, it is safer and more respected. I don't want to think of the Ryanair pilot who flew me from Gatwick to Alicante last night in storms on a severely delayed flight, who I trust all the time with my life and my family's life, had not gone through the hurdles that they went through to join the training program to be an APL pilot. They don't just get accepted because they're going to give them a load of money at this training school. They have to prove they are competent enough to go into that training program and succeed. And we're not doing that at the moment. So, we're talking about a lot of problems today. We are talking through problems.
The whole thing, I mean, I believe the solution starts right at the base.
Yeah.
Okay. However, the DVSA are going to want to put a sticking plaster over it, and pretty damn soon. Chris, what is that sticking plaster?
Yeah, just about to say, what is the solution if we had a perfect world?
Oh, I do like to dump him in it. Good job, he's me mate.
It's the size of the whole thing that's the problem, and it's on both sides of the fence. I alluded to early on. I spoke about the failings of DVSA in certain areas and how they've been taking people who have got no technical competence or training at all and making technical decisions at a high level, and they are so. It's not a kind of open arrogance. Well, it's dead easy. I know the answer to this. They talk about it as if they believe they actually know it. I had to deal with a case about a year or so ago of an application for somebody to become an ADI, and it was a complicated case. I ended up. I spoke to a lady in comms who was lovely, really helpful from the comms point of view, and I wanted to put this team together to deal with this complex case. I spent about 10 minutes listening to this lady telling me how this person wouldn't be able to manage an ADI Part 3, what was involved in an ADI Part 3, what it should look like, what it didn't look like, what we did do and what we didn't do. She was a comms person. She'd never been near an ADI
I
testing.
wouldn't presume to tell you that.
And I just sat there and I thought, well, you go for it. You go for it. I'll just sit here and listen, and then I'll tell you at the end of it. And it's
And I
endemic.
my
It's
hands. I'm
endemic
probably
everywhere.
going
I
to get
think
into
at the moment.
trouble about this, but do I look like a woman who cares? I had a very similar experience of that with individuals at a much more senior level in a meeting that was very contentious to start with on all sides, and they were talking about the process to do with examiner recruitment and deployment, and I could actually see the person whose job it is on the ground to do that was desperately trying to get in and correct them and actually say, no, this is what we're really trying to do, but that seniority thing meant they possibly couldn't do. And I think what you're saying there is a very real problem within the organization itself.
I've been to plenty of NAS meetings, and I was at one, and there was myself and two other guys there. One was the assistant chief on the enforcement side for ADIs, and the other one was his training officer that kind of organised all the training for that. Three of us sat in there, and there was a discussion started about something to do with ADI. I can't even remember what it was, but the discussion went, and the people leading the discussion were a head of policy who'd come in from a completely different business entirely and knew nothing about testing at all, and another two or three people who knew nothing about testing, including ADIs in that meeting. And we tried to intervene and give some feedback on it, and we just got told off, so we give up. We just sat looking at each other.
I was
The only
probably
thing
one of
we
the
experts in
ultimate
the
ones.
room.
You know now you can just tell me to shut up.
Oh, well, I can get away with that. Sometimes. But the other side of that is we're talking about the ADI world and things that have come up. And the people in here tonight, I'm assuming, are the cream of the crop, the good people, because they wouldn't spend their time and money doing this kind of thing if they didn't care about it and trying to do it right. It's the other people that need to target. It's
Yeah.
almost, how do we reach the bottom end? How do we reach the people that are not doing the job right and not interested in doing the
That's
job?
one of the biggest
To be
risks.
honest, can
These
I
are the
answer
big
that,
risks we've
Chris?
got at the moment.
Can
Right?
I just tell you about the next bit first? I'll just let me talk about this because the ADIs obviously hear all the stuff from their point of view about DVSA, and this is what I've experienced from the ADI world, and to a certain degree in the motorbike world as well, in the CBT world.
That's true.
Look, sign up for your instructor course. I'll make you a driving instructor. There's a book. Go and learn that. There's some questions. Go and do that. You don't need my help with that. The ADI Part 1's just common sense. Go and have a go at that. If you fail, come back. I'll give you a bit more help with it. Or you've passed. Okay. Now, the ADI Part 2. You're already a driver. You've been driving for years. So just go and have a go at the ADI Part 2. Again, if you're unlucky, and don't get through it, come back. I'll give you a bit of help. We'll get you through it. But it's all about the ADI Part 3. That's where we need to spend our time and put the work into. They've got absolutely no idea, completely clueless about how the three separate issues are supposed to be joined together. Graham's laughing because he delivers
I
his
was at
training.
the meeting last Tuesday, Chris, and I was in one in which Carly had gone home, and
Tell everybody on the Skype. Thanks very much,
yeah,
Graham.
no,
Friends of
I've gone
in
into
another
one,
part of the
Carly.
country. Taking out, I went there and watched TV. I didn't. I was travelling.
No, it was about it was about responsibility, and I think what the issue is, we want to blame the DVSA. The DVSA want to blame us, and I think all I want to say is both parties have got to try to take more responsibility. It can't be done one without the other.
But Graham, you can't complain about standards falling of ADIs, and I'm not saying across the board, but they can't be saying an ADI, you need to pull your socks up, and there's problems over here, and we know there's bad operators in the field, but we're not going to prioritize getting back to standards checks in a way, or bring in anything that could be used to digitally in a way replace standards checks, like an interim digital theory test that could work, or anything on that basis. We're just actually going to let this scenario carry on because we can't cope with Cat B, and some people will not have had a standards check for 7 to 8 years now in this cycle.
Well, yeah.
It's your fault that we haven't come in and done anything to help you achieve better, define your faults. We don't even push out the tip report. To me, we shouldn't. If you think that tip report's so important to help people evaluate their standards, send it out as a push message once a year at least. Don't ask somebody to ask for it. Send it out so it's there and they're looking at it.
The result of that, standards check and that kind of stuff.
hang on just a sec. I get tipped and have a standards check every 4 years. Yeah, I get tipped and have a standards check every 4 years, which is an interesting scenario because I don't teach learner drivers. So, but also apart, what was my thinking was about comms and communication.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can't get to enough ADIs and PDIs. However, where do they all go? Yeah, on a fairly regular basis, and where will the message get out? The driving test centres is where ADIs and PDIs will turn up in. If the message comes from there, at least there's a chance of the message spreading. However, if it's just email and like poor social media, then what's happening is that people are just getting bored with it because there seems to be one survey after another, and no change.
I did say yesterday, I do think you should look. It's difficult, isn't it? Because it's that balance of having no time to do testing, but then saying have a few town hall meetings more in your local test centres. However, if there's a massive power to those town hall centre meetings and it can empower people, totally agree with them. And what I said was maybe you should be doing more of these town hall meetings and set them as a standard and set a standard script. I know there's local issues, and that's fine. You can discuss local issues, but the problem is we have a bit of an inequality in that some test centres are doing those town hall meetings and doing them well, but other centres aren't doing them at all. Some people are getting information because they've got a good DTC manager and team. Some aren't getting anything because they haven't. So I said to DVSA, you need to have consistent standards and educate everybody in every DTC. You're our ambassadors. Do that job. We'll empower you to do that job, but don't stay from the script too much because it puts the fox in the chicken house, or some people don't get the right messages in one part of the country and some do. But have a consistent effort to do that communication because it is important. I know we're all time poor in this scenario, but it is important that people feel they've got the opportunity to hear directly from personnel in those test centres, and that they're empowered to be actually having those conversations, and they've got the intel, they've got the right information to give out as well.
It is possible to do that without affecting the delivery of tests, because invariably, going back over many, many years, certainly back before I started, the people who are dealing with those meetings aren't the examiners, the local management. The LDTM doesn't do tests normally. They're straight away. There's somebody to talk to about local issues. And then you bring in the ODM, who talks about DVSA and more generic issues. And the examiners are still at their testing. And the LDTM should know exactly what's going on in their test centre and what's not happening. So you can do that kind of thing, no problem at all. One of the things that I wanted to get done was to redevelop audit to what it should be. So Graham mentioned his favourite subject about the paperwork, the ATs and stuff like that. Consequence and reward. I wanted to change those. So you're going to sign those off. Instead of things like 40 hours minimum training for that, 20 hours for that, another 5 hours for that. Time-bound training for me is almost a waste of time because everybody's different, and everybody in this meeting knows better than anybody that everybody learns differently at different rates. Graham's as bright as the come, he's the shining star. He might be able to do it in 40 hours. It might take me 80 because I'm just a thick northerner. Who knows? You don't know. So why, instead of making it time-bound, why not give the ADI who's teaching the PDI the responsibility of signing each aspect off? Decide what those aspects are, completely different to what they are at the moment, I know, Graham, but give them the responsibility of signing those off and then see what happens. Because if you keep signing them off and the results are negative, there's going to be a consequence. If you keep signing them off and you've got good results, we need to find a way of rewarding you for that. And you should be recognised and rewarded for that. And that's a message I really, really struggle to get through. Really struggle to get through.
And again, it's like the chicken and egg situation. We haven't got the chicken and egg situation. We know that where we have to start is with the quality of trainers, the training of trainers. And that starts from, audit and that becoming a much more robust animal than it ever has been. What is the delivery of the training there? You can have a more robust training system and curriculum, and as you said, but it can still be client centered. And actually, if you've got a better benchmark that everybody's following, you can actually monitor that benchmark better than at the moment. We can't even have it. Just staggers me coming from different sectors of learning and development that there is not even a standard template that's issued by the regulator on the logbook. I can present you with a logbook that is on the back of a packet of Marlboro Lights, or I can present you with something which is extremely good, very comprehensive. But how do you benchmark when you've got such disparity in one single element of the training? And we've got that across the board in so many other ways. So I think we have to start with those elements that you talked about. Otherwise, we won't get a different result in the end product, which is the pupil.
Let me give you a bit more
Just going
background on
back,
that,
Go ahead, Chris.
on the audit thing, because as I worked my way through, I went down the technical side rather than the management side. I got some management, but it was managing technical things. It was all about the technical for me. I really enjoyed it and still do, which is why I'm doing this. Of all the courses I did, the most difficult course I achieved in the end was the audit training course. It was a 2-week training course. It was 2-to-1 ratio. And we were deliberately pushed to the limits by my instructor, who was magnificent, absolutely wonderful, brilliant. And it was all about, right, we're going to take this down to the central piece of the difference between pass and fail, down to the detail, because anybody can tell a very easy one, a very good one, or a real bad one for pass or fail. So I went on from there into audit. Audit at that point was a bit like they did with the LGV Vol Reg. It was going to be voluntary. And we were told it was softly, baby steps with audit until we got it built up. And then it was going to become compulsory for anybody who wanted to train ADIs, which obviously never happened. Now then, I mentioned at the start this, I went and did a couple of different jobs. When I came back on the ADI side after maybe 2 years away from it, and I wasn't completely away from it, there was a meeting called about audit with myself and a few others. And the question was asked was, do we continue with it, or do we just lose it? Maybe give it over to the industry, like we did with the LGV. And I said, well, I'd like to keep it, but make it what it is. I said, while we're on that note, I can't find anywhere the training program for the audit qualification. I can't find a list of examiners who are qualified to do that, how much they've done, or nothing like that. It should all be stored in L&D's records, and there's nothing there. And there was a silence to descend on the room. And they said, well, actually, the training course, I said, yeah, it's a 1-day attendee course. So we get them to accompany another examiner on an audit visit, and that's it. As long as they do okay on the day and they pay enough attention, they've qualified. So they took the hardest course in my technical career, the most difficult assessment, most difficult test to assess, which was a 2-week course, and it got reduced by somebody, and I don't know who, to 1 day. And that's what these talented people, these people who want to do the job right, who want to do well, and encourage instructors to do the right thing and be able to help them and develop, that's the tool they're given to deal with. That's what we're dealing with. When you get things like a senior manager, I'm talking about a serious senior manager, grade 6, shouting across a room in a meeting, I'm fed up with quality and standards, I'm fed up with hearing about it, because all it does is get in the way of getting the job done. That's what you're dealing with.
And that's setting the tone,
Yeah.
a negative tone, but that's somebody who's supposed to be an ambassador for the right thing, being the absolute opposite.
Exactly. And this is what I was referring to early on, when you've got this mismatch and balance between technical and throughput, if you like, through the quality and throughput. No, we just want people through. No, we want to be absolutely perfect. It's got to be somewhere between the two. Like, it's one of the big we need to make loads of money. No, we need to make sure it's right, so our pupils return for tests to get it right. It's that balance has got to be, and the balance is out of kilter at the moment. It's massively out of kilter.
I'm just conscious of time, and I know people really stayed with us. So what I've asked, and please continue, Chris, but just to draw people's attention to it, if you haven't seen it in the chat, I've asked you all as a kind of like summary thing, because we don't want to be all about problems in this session. We want to be about some solutions as well. And I will be taking away some of people's suggestions, because in these sessions we get some brilliant ideas from people who are actually doing the job at the coalface. If I was your genie, and I'd just come out of the lamp and I said to you, you've got 3 wishes which you can use to resolve the issues in the industry. You can use the issues to resolve pupil issues and how we train pupils, PDIs, how we recruit and deploy examiners, or the current test situation. I've asked people in the chat to give me their 3 wishes and how they'd use them. But how would the panel, how would you two, what would you have your 3 wishes be? Go on, Greg, 'cause you've been
I'll go first. Okay. For me, I mean, and bearing in mind that this is sort of my passion, an initial process for entry to training. So PDI is having a screening program to make sure that they were fit for the job and the job would fit them,
Yeah.
which I think is really important.
Before they pay thousands of pounds.
Before they copped out and
That might not be
and are moaning about being ripped off by all sorts of colourful organisations, there should be an initial entry process, which both the large organisations could do as well as the DVSA. So we could do that ourselves. We don't even have to have the DVSA do it. If trainers run that screening program, then that would help people. But at the moment, 2 arms, 2 legs, a pulse, and some money is the initial bit. I also strongly believe that we need trained trainers who have a list of qualifications and CPD behind them before they start training
And
PDI.
experience. I could, I'm not saying I could qualify as an ADI because again, I'm a marketeer. We're not that bright. We might seem very bright and buzzy, but we're not necessarily that bright. But I could, I could qualify as an ADI in the next couple of weeks. Well, I couldn't because I couldn't get a part 2 or 3 test probably, but I could qualify. And then in 6 months, I could go, do you know what? I'm rather good at this. I think I'm going to go and share my vast experience and expertise with other people and charge them thousands of pounds for it. My God, that shocked me when I came into this sector that you could do that within 6 months of qualifying.
It was happening 30 years ago with a company that went out of business, Let's Drive. I remember people passing their part 3 the next day being trainers.
Yeah.
And the third wish is really for us to have internal and external monitors so that we can make sure that our standards are up to standard and not rely on the DVSA doing our standards checks, because I believe that standards must be maintained. So I think we as an industry could do something about it. And I put this nicely, but sod the bloody DVSA. We could do this ourselves and make us better, and then the people who want to buy into that will become better. And in my experience, the better people do a better job, and the knock-on effect is they actually earn more money.
Yeah,
which everyone seems to like.
Okay, that's good, and that got a lot of applause there, Graham. You like that. Your ego will like that. There was a lot of clapping.
Before I finish, because I will finish, but there is someone that I am eternally grateful, and this is going out tomorrow. Someone went, "Yay! I love Graham."
Obviously, a poor judge of character, Graham.
I paid them a lot of money, yeah, but it's in there.
Blink twice if you need help, that person.
Shot on my phone.
Maybe there's some Stockholm syndrome going on because you might have spent too much time with Graham.
Sending it to the DIA tomorrow. Yeah, okay.
Well, he was going to thank me then, Chris, or you. Did you? I was getting. Oh, I thought he was going to
do. No.
Just going to eulogy to me and
you
you.
haven't told me you love me yet, so it's okay.
I'll go.
You don't have to, Graham.
I want Chris to have the last word as the expert in this space, and I'm very excited. We've had Chris on here tonight. We hope with DIA to work more closely with Chris on trying to engineer a perfect world, because I'm a great believer.
We have got a workshop coming up with Chris.
Yes, you have in August. I'll let you plug that at the end. My 3. Well, I don't know what I'm going to get to 3 with this. Is as you know, I'm a real advocate of introducing a better pre-test program of learning to drive, a more consistent program that allows ADIs to have much more power in doing some assessing as part of it, and competence-led stuff in car, things like that, like the milestones program. So that's one thing I'd like to see happening. I'm like Graham. I want to see a much better management, particularly at this massive peak of demand that we've got at the moment of PDI entrants. I think we've got to manage their expectations and give them a fairer welcome into the industry, and also a fairer assessment of it's not for you, go and do something else before you waste all this money. But when we do accept you into it, we give you a better training program than we've got at the moment, and it's a measurable training program, not you can go off and do what you want, audit trainer, we really don't care as long as they pass this 3-part test. It's a bit like learners, isn't it? We're training PDIs to just get through 3 tests. We're not training them for the job of being a trainer for life. So we
Yeah.
want trainers who can train for life safely and safe drivers for life. And my third one is probably a very holistic and all-encompassing one. I would like DVSA, like they did with taxi, we've managed to pick up very successfully for them on the testing side. I'd like them to consider more divesting of their services because they don't do some things very well. They're a distraction. They stop them from doing the things that they should do as a regulator well or at all. So why not divest to the industry, which is what Moderniser Driving Trainer was about in terms of trainers. And I had a 5-year strategy workshop with DVSA the other week, and I just was like a parrot. I was like, divest, that's your strategy. Divest, divest, divest. And then focus on what you can do tomorrow. Oh, and stop doing projects that are around the background that are a lot of kind of jam tomorrow, not bread today. You can only do what you need to do at the moment. You haven't got time for luxury projects. And those people who are sat there doing these luxury projects, unless they can be trained to be an effective examiner, via one of your systems, what are they doing there? Ship them out. Either ship them to the front line or ship them out of the organisation. So those are my 3. Chris, over to you.
Yeah. Just on that note, before I dive into it, because everybody's touched on it, I'm going to strip it right back to basics. What is the test there for? Why do we have a test? The test is there to confirm the ADI or PDI's professional opinion that this person is ready to have a license. So why are people turning up that's got absolutely no chance of getting it?
Yeah.
That's the first thing. My wish is kind of encompasses everything you've said, but probably a bit more simple. Recruitment, get the right people into the right job at the right time, both ADIs and examiners.
Yeah.
Training, Kaizen, development, call it what you will, all those words, look after people. If you're not going forward, you're going backwards, that kind of approach. Develop people, invest in them, they're worth it, and you will reap the rewards. And finally, quality, quality, quality. Get the quality right. That is, without the quality, the whole system that all your jobs and the job I used to do and the examiners and the ADIs is a complete not a waste of time. Complete not a waste of time, because if we can't get the bit right that it was designed to do, what's the point? That's my wish.
Brilliant. And quality is safety, isn't it?
Exactly. That's the whole point. Yeah.
If we have quality, we would have better safety outcomes. And if you don't necessarily care about safety in terms of human life, and believe me, when we're talking to some 17-year-old lads and even fleet decision makers, they don't necessarily, they'll put a face on that says they do, but quality also leads to cost reduction and efficiency as well. So if you're talking about the bottom line and not human lives, there's a win-win with quality, isn't there, and safety. Thank you so much for tonight, guys. I hope you all agree with me that it's been a fascinating discussion, particularly
Some brilliant comments. Brilliant.
good comments from there. I will take note of those comments from your 3 wishes and things like that. Thank you for giving your time to stay with us tonight. We've gone on longer, but God, it's an important discussion we're having here tonight. And what you say to me here informs what I, as your vessel, go into other rooms and speak for you. I'm not necessarily the expert. I'm surrounded by experts like Chris and Graham and Olivia and Sarah. But my expertise is making sure that we do get into that room and that we get heard and not taking, excuse my language, bullshit answers for things, and just keep poking and poking and poking. So keep giving me the ability to poke and kick doors down where I can. And I'll go through them with your words in my mouth, or taking these lovely people that are here with me. And also make sure you respond to that consultation, because not only can you answer the questions, you can leave comments, I believe, in that consultation as well. But if you feel frustrated by their process in the consultation not giving you enough latitude to say more rather than tick boxes, then please write to me, because we will be writing an overall response to the consultation as a major stakeholder, and I will put that in my report, your words in my report as well. And sometimes I don't even bother with DVSA. I go to DFT because I think I'll get a better answer and I'll get a bit more power for that from their elbow. So I can take those reports up to ministerial level as well and those views. So thank you so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Chris and Graham, I'll catch up with you at some point soon, but thank you for your time tonight as well.
Thank you for the
And
invite.
good luck out there, guys. You're doing an amazing job in challenging circumstances. And we're just so fortunate that we've got committed individuals like you doing that, despite some of the tools that you are given to work with. Thanks, guys. Enjoy your evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks
Bye
for
all.
everyone.